What's up, everyone? Welcome into the All 22 NFL podcast. You got Chris and Ray. And Ray, the season's over. We already did our congratulations to our 85% championship listeners. But now we know the draft order. It is set in stone. And a lot of people this is the best time of year for them because their teams just, aren't in that next phase. So I'm over here. I'm really excited. I hope you are too. You guys, where did you end up? The Cowboys. I only did the top 10 order. That's all we're talking about today. But where did the Cowboys end up?
12 because the 49ers, even when they are not having a good year, they still managed to beat the Cowboys and select 11th. So, yeah.
Yikes.
Dallas at 12. San Fran at 11.
Okay. Where did you guys get Parsons a couple of years ago? Was that 11?
We traded back. I think we might have gotten him at 12.
So, hey, there's worse things than picking 12.
Yeah. I mean, he didn't play his senior year. I don't think there's someone who didn't, or his junior year. I don't think there's someone in this class who didn't play at all this year who's going to be taken in the top 12 and become Micah Parsons. Siobhan Ravel, the corner from ECU, we will get to at some point. Maybe not this episode. But a Micah Parsons level player that just disappeared for the past year is probably not happening again.
Yeah, it's a good point. There was a few players in that draft where that happened, right? Jamar Chase, Penny Sewell. But yeah, okay. So let's get into the draft order. That's now finalized. We're going to talk about the top 10 real quick, and then we'll go into our way too early QB rankings. But the Tennessee Titans are kind of the topic of conversation today because they move from 2-1. They now have the number 1 overall pick. And they have a few needs, right? This is a team that has invested a lot into the offensive line. They've tried to invest a lot at receiver. They've tried to invest a lot at cornerback. And they don't really have those positions really figured out yet. I like what they've done on the offensive line. There's still some things to do. But, at pick 1, this is traditionally the quarterback pick, right? I mean, I think that's just fair, right? I think I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's probably 80% of the time the number 1 pick is a quarterback. I don't think that's the Titans' path. If you look at the Titans' history in the last 5 years or so, and I don't have it in front of me, so I'm just shooting off the hip here, but they've invested a lot of capital in 2 positions. One is wide receiver. We're talking Treylon Burks. We're talking Calvin Ridley, Hopkins. They put a lot of resources into that position. And they're standing here today and it doesn't really look good, right? It's like with all the investments that they've made, it's still not a strength of them. You look at corner, which is the other position that they have spent a lot of time investing in. We're talking Caleb Farley, L'Jarius Sneed. How many corners did they draft in those 2 or 3 years in a row? They kept drafting corners and they're still sitting here today. And I don't know if they even have one corner, right? L'Jarius Sneed this year had a rough go, really, really rough go. So I don't think they feel strong about that position either, even though they've invested a lot of resources. There's one player in this draft that does both of those things. He is also potentially the only elite prospect at a valuable position in this draft. Tennessee's at 1. Why would they not draft Travis Hunter?
Because a quarterback is still the most valuable position and they're desperate for a quarterback. I mean, if you go best player available, the quote unquote best player available, which is a trope, yeah, it's probably Travis Hunter at whichever position you want to play him. But BPA is not what these teams follow. They go for need. They go for short-term incentives when jobs are on the line and when things are getting stale. And at the top of the draft, it's typically reaching for a quarterback. And in this class, that would just be the epitome of doing so, because most feel that you don't really have a top pick worthy level quarterback in the class right now. That doesn't preclude one from still drafting one that high. So positional value would be the reason why they don't go Travis Hunter, because BPA is a lie. These teams don't go best player available, even if, though, and when they should. So that would be why. That doesn't mean it's a good choice, but that would be why.
Can I challenge that?
Sure.
So quarterback in all 22, right? Which is based on how the NFL values these players because it's what they pay them. That's how these numbers are made. Quarterback is worth 10.87% of our scoring, right? Wide receiver is 6.04 and corner is 4.12. If you have a guy that can do both of those things, it's still less than a quarterback at 10.16, but it's pretty damn close. And if you're talking about the elite level talent that Hunter brings, and again, I'm talking about potentially, it's too early to say this, but potentially the best corner that we've ever scouted. Okay. That level of corner. And Garrett Wilson-esque receiver, right? So like a very good number one wide receiver that can run routes and do big, crazy things. If you're telling me you get both of those players with Travis Hunter, which I understand he's not going to play both sides, but it doesn't mean he can't play cornerback and then a few series here and there at receiver, right? Or he could play receiver and a few series here or there at corner. Like, yeah, he's never going to get to that 10%, but it's way more valuable than just saying it's, quarterback's the most valuable position. It's 4 points more valuable than receiver, 6 more than corner. It doesn't equate that way because this guy does both.
How many games does that win you? Travis Hunter at receiver being thrown the ball to from Will Levis wins you 5 games.
So here's the thing though, Ray. We're going to talk about this later, but we'll talk about this later, but these quarterbacks in this draft, how much better do you think they are than Will Levis? Right? Because that's the other question is if they're better, if they're truly better, if they are huge different makers than Will Levis, then I probably agree with you. But are we sure of that?
I think Cam Ward is clearly better. I think Shedeur is clearly better. But that still may not be good enough. But I think they're better enough for someone making the decision with a need at the position to say, well, I'm going to improve the most important position on the roster, which is quarterback. I need to do that. And these guys are a clear improvement. So here you go. Whichever one is your guy, Cam Ward, Shedeur, whoever, I'm going to take my quarterback because I need to improve it. And here he is.
We'll talk about it. We're going to talk about that. Let's move on to the second pick, which is now Cleveland. They moved from 3 to 2. Their biggest need as well, quarterback. They also have needs at running back with Nick Chubb's injury, wide receiver, tackle. So this is really offensive focused draft for Cleveland after they've invested plenty of capital on the defensive side. And they really do have a top 5 defense in the NFL still probably, but they're losing a lot on offense. They've obviously missed so many times at quarterback. I think this is probably where the quarterback conversation begins, but we'll debate that all offseason, so don't worry about that. At 3 is the New York Giants. They moved from 4 to 3. Biggest need quarterback, tackle, corner. Pats are at 4 now. They went from 1 to 4, and that's just, hey, you win one game. Not only do you move back 3 spots in this draft, but you probably lose out on a future first, right? With the trades that could have been on the table for you. So huge impact for the Patriots moving from 1 to 4. I still think it's a decent position for them because yes, they're not getting that additional capital they would have got if they would have traded back, but you're still getting potentially the best receiver in the draft, which I think is huge for Drake May. Jacksonville stays at 5. Their needs interior offensive line, tackle, corner. Vegas moves from 8 to 6, which is, good for them. They need a quarterback in a bad way, running back, corner. Jets stay at 7. Their biggest needs quarterback, tight end, defensive interior, and corner. Carolina moves from 6 to 8. Biggest needs quarterback, wide receiver, edge, and linebacker. I think quarterback can be taken off of that one. Bryce Young's been doing pretty well. New Orleans moves from 10 to 9. Their biggest needs are guard and defensive line. And then Chicago moves from 9 to 10. And their biggest needs are guard, tackle, and defensive interior. I don't think there's much for us to debate about this stuff now. Obviously, we can maybe even do some mock draft stuff in a couple weeks just to have some fun with it. But I think the biggest thing impacting this draft order and the way we're going to look at what teams are going to potentially do is now the amount of these teams that don't have head coaches currently or don't have a GM currently and how those positions start to get filled. We're talking about the Patriots just decided to move on from Jerod Mayo. Do we think that's a good move? We could talk about it, right? Jacksonville just fires Doug Peterson. That's an available spot. Sounds like Vegas is keeping their coach. Jets obviously have an opening. Carolina's keeping their coach, I believe. New Orleans has an opening. Chicago has an opening. So, a lot of turmoil in these teams, the coaching. We're going to talk about what those coaching changes might mean for them. I think that's a whole other podcast episode that maybe you and I do next week. But what do you think, Jerod Mayo? Like, what do you think of that move by the Patriots?
When you let go of someone after one season, there's clearly something there that caused you to pull the trigger that quickly. It doesn't look good on the organization to do that. It's not a good sales pitch to a young up-and-coming head coach when you don't have a very strong roster to say, hey, come here and look at the last guy. 12 months ago, he was doing his press conference, and now he's also on the unemployment line. It's not a good look for the organization. So in order for them to do that, knowing that, he had to have been either in over his head, or there was just an issue with fit that was not going to be resolved. So to that end, it's one of those, you never get the full story, but clearly there was something there, or rather enough there for them to move on. And so they're going to get clowned for it. There's going to be people opining about how it shows dysfunction and everything else. And it's not that that's all false, but that's all baked into the stock price when they make that decision to move on. They know the heat that's going to come their way for doing so, and still deemed it worthy to do. So I have to, I guess, side with them on that and trust their judgment on, like you always say, if you're going to fail fast. It was a mistake. They identified the mistake and they failed fast and didn't prolong the pain and make this bigger than it needed to be.
I think it's fine when teams basically are in kind of like a transition phase, right? And they say, we need a coach that's going to get us to the next step, but not necessarily the coach of the future. I'm usually okay with that. And while I'm okay with everything you said, and I agree with most of it, if I would have said to you, what is the goal of the New England Patriots for the 2024 season, what would you have said to me?
For the 2024 season?
Yes.
Identify whether or not Drake May is your guy.
Do you think they did that?
Yes.
Me too. So I think they fulfilled with flying colors the one goal, one objective that team had. I think they did it really well. So that's the only thing I struggle with, because I think, whether that's, credit to Jerod Mayo or not, it got done under his leadership. That says something to me. I think other teams will value that. And I'm not sure he'll get another head coaching position, but I'm sure he'll get another coordinator position, and people will pay him well to do that.
I think, that's fair. You identified that Drake May is the guy relatively early. So it's one of those like, okay, now what's next? And then you start looking at other areas of the organization and you say, this isn't quite up to par. And you got to remember too, this Mayo was identified early on by the Patriots. This is their guy in that organization. They know him well. So again, he was almost like the chosen one here, the next guy up, the prodigal son. And then when he was in the chair, for them to reverse course that quickly, maybe May's development is more on him and the offensive side of the ball and who's calling plays there than Mayo's organizational development at that point. And they pull the trigger. So sometimes it's just, he got in too early, flew a little too close to the sun too early. That's all it is.
Okay. All right. Well, let's save the rest of the coaching conversation for next episode. I think that's going to be a fantastic episode. I'm really excited to get into that with you. But we did promise the listeners that we would start talking about quarterbacks. And I regret that decision. I'll say it. I regret that decision because I have a list of 3 and I wanted to have 5. I reviewed 7. And I had a really hard time with this draft class because I got to a point where I said to myself, I don't know if this, like, the reason being is all 22, you're going to roster 3 to 4 quarterbacks max. Like, it's very rare that you're going to roster more than 4 quarterbacks. I haven't really seen it in any of my leagues. So if a guy gets picked in the 5th, 6th, 7th round that you're not insanely high on, you're not drafting him and you're not going to roster him and nobody's going to roster him. So I don't think it really makes sense to include those type of players in a list at all, right? So while I wanted to get to 5 and say, here are 5 quarterbacks that I think we could keep an eye on for the draft that might be interesting for teams, I don't think this draft has 5 quarterbacks that are going to be interesting for all 22 users. I really don't. I don't know if you had a similar experience.
What is the final number you ended up on?
3. I mean, I have other guys I'm ready to talk about, but the list is 3.
I think it's a stretch to say that there's 3 that they would be interested in. I think 3 is a stretch. I think 2 is like touching your toes, and 3 is like that thing where like they pull like their leg over their like. I think you're really reaching to get to 3. I think there's 2 that are worth discussing, and that's about it.
We're going to talk about more than 2, so I guess we're almost on the same page. I don't think talking about 2 is touching your toes. I will say that. But why don't we start at the very end? And I guess we'll start with like maybe Will Howard. Did you have any notes on Will Howard? What are your thoughts on him?
Will Howard is the prototypical college quarterback with big stats that just doesn't really translate to the NFL at all. Is not necessarily a quick decision maker. He's prone to turning the ball over. He kind of is athletic and buys some time in the pocket and can scramble a little bit, but is not super dynamic. And in reality, he just has the luxury of throwing to absolute insane wide receiver talent at Ohio State. Jeremiah Smith might be, I don't even think Jeremiah Smith today is a top 5 receiver in the NFL today. And he's like 18 years old, true freshman. So he's phenomenal. They have Emeka Egbuka. I mean, the talent, it's an assembly line of receivers at Ohio State. And I think he's just an elder statesman in college who just gets the ball to those guys, and that's it. And he's not asked to do much more, and he doesn't need to be asked to do any more than that. And I think it just is what it is. I think he could maybe latch on as a backup in the NFL, and maybe someone who can come in for a game or 2 and provide some spark because he has some mobility, and there's some, I don't want to say playmaking ability to his game, but he'll make a play here or there off structure. But long term, snap after snap after snap, down after down after down, it's not an NFL starter level of quarterback play. It just isn't.
Okay. Yeah. That match is pretty spot on with what I had. I think he did a really nice job of trusting his receivers. It's one thing to have the receivers. It's another thing to be willing to give them opportunities. And I think Will Howard did a great job of that. I think he throws a very accurate deep ball. And obviously he has good frame. He has NFL frame, but he has really poor throwing mechanics, bad mechanics, honestly, in general. Don't like his motions. Don't like the way he does things in the pocket. And, to your point, I just don't think he has that level of talent you're saying as an NFL starter, but like, look at the Eagles right now and look at the depth chart that they have at quarterback. I don't think Will Howard makes that team. Look at the Cowboys depth chart and what they have at quarterback. I don't think he makes that team. That's why I struggled with this exercise in this draft class is like probably some people's QB5, I don't think makes a lot of NFL rosters as like a QB3. Will he get a shot on, late day 3 pick? I'm sure of it. I'm sure he will, but he's probably a practice squad player in my mind.
Yeah. It's
good.
I think it's fair. And that's what QB5. So this is where we are.
Yeah, this is tough. Okay. My QB4 was Jalen Milroe. And again, I only had 3, but I'm just putting them in some order. My 4 was Jalen Milroe. And just to give some like high level numbers, he's 22 years old. I watched 2 games of his. I watched him against Michigan, him against Wisconsin. He's 6'2", 225. He's a 2-year starter with Alabama, 88.7 grade and an 86.6. In the last 2 years, he has 45 big time throws and 21 turnover plays, a 10-yard ADOT, 19.9 pressure to sack rate, 2.87 time to throw this year, which is way down from 3.44 the year before. So I'll give you my notes on this one since I had you go first last time. He is a strong, deep passer with a 92.3 grade and 16 big-time throws versus 1 turnover play on deep passes, right? So 20-plus yards or more. He's got a very powerful arm. He can touch the ball into different spots that are very difficult for even NFL quarterbacks today. Some NFL quarterbacks cannot make some of the difficult throws that Jalen Milroe did down the field. So that's an obvious plus. And then I think he has a running ability that I think would threaten any quarterback in the NFL today, including Lamar and Jaden Daniels, because unlike those two guys, I think Jalen Milroe he's built like a running back. Like he's 6'2", 225. He actually looks like a running back when he's running the ball. Lamar and Daniels are more like, suave. They're savvy. They fit through, they contort their body. They fit through spaces they shouldn't. That's not really Milroe. Milroe's like a legitimate running back the way he runs the ball. So that is interesting and is a positive that not a lot of other quarterbacks have. My negatives. In short passes, he has a 58.8 PFF grade. He's got jumpy feet in the pocket and never looks relaxed. He struggles with his accuracies when wide receivers are wide open. And his drop-offs are never on the mark. He does not make it look easy, right? When you go through your read and it's not there and you're meant to drop it off to your guy, this guy is throwing behind players. He's throwing into defensive players so that you're getting your guy destroyed. And it just happened over and over and over again. And those are things that, to me, if you don't have those fundamentals, you cannot be a quarterback in the NFL. Like you can't do it. Like you'll get somebody killed. You'll turn the ball over too much. NFL defenses are just too good for that kind of play in my mind, where I don't really like, I've never said this about a quarterback that is getting hype to be, an NFL quarterback. I really think this is the first player I've ever watched that I said, I really think it makes sense for him to change his position in the NFL. I think he can have a really positive future if he decides to be a running back, if he decides to be a tight end, if he decides to be some kind of skill hybrid. He has that physicality. He has that running ability where he would excel. Like he would actually be a good prospect if you just told me he was a running back. But as a quarterback, the things that he needs to do in the NFL, he just can't do them right now. Maybe he'll just go back to school, right? Like I think that probably is still on the table for him.
I mean, he would have to do a 180 because he declared. He said, I'm gone. So he would have to go back on his word. So he's in.
Right. But to me, it's like, I'm surprised. I'm surprised by that. Maybe there's a team, right? Maybe the Colts are saying this is a guy that could back up Anthony Richardson or, Jalen Hurts or somebody like that, where they say, we want this guy to come in. I also think a team could absolutely create some kind of wildcat offense and actually run with it for a year with Jalen Milroe. I just don't think that's how you win a championship. So those are my thoughts. I want to hear what you have.
The bottom line with Jalen Milroe is he's not a natural passer. Like hardly at all. He's a thrower and he could throw the football at times really well downfield, but he's not a natural passer. So when you have to pass the ball against an NFL defense 34 times in a single game, again, against an NFL defense, and you're not a natural at it, you are going to have serious problems. And that's really just all it comes down to. He's not a natural passer. He's a thrower. He doesn't have feel in the pocket. He makes plays with his feet and he can buy time and he's big and strong and athletic, but he can't manipulate the pocket, as the old cliche goes, like a quarterback, like a good quarterback would, should, and does. That's just not him. He's an athlete playing football. And this is why I always say Twitter is not a real place, because Bill O'Brien got roasted for saying this years ago about Jalen Milroe, and he was right. And nobody apologized. Nobody apologized. The same way nobody apologized to the Giants for passing on, rest in peace, Dwayne Haskins in the draft. So, yeah, it's just Bill O'Brien. You can say what you want about him as a coach, as a GM, whatever. Guy knows what to look for in quarterbacks, and he immediately was like, nope, this guy in it is a quarterback, and there's a reason for that. And we're seeing that bear fruit, despite the advantages that he has at the helm, being the quarterback at Alabama. And you just kind of see how the whole offensive system production and output ended up at the end of this season. It's because of those limitations. And after a while, they just all catch up to you. So whether it's a position change or Taysom Hill type of role for, to stick around in the NFL, it's not as a standard starting quarterback for a franchise over the long term. It just is not.
Did you have him ranked in your rankings at all, or were you just like, he's not there?
Quarterback's a little different. I mean, for me, I haven't ranked too many yet because I feel like I have to watch more. I like to watch at least like 65, 70 players before I start to rank them, just so I don't miss one. And then all of a sudden, after talking about my top 20 for 5 weeks, I have 5 new names in there because I finally got around to watching a new batch of players. And with quarterback, it's different anyway, because I usually just put them in the bucket of would I want to draft them or not? Or do I see what would make someone want to draft them? And despite the physical traits for Milroe, I truly don't, unless the plan is a non-conventional role outside of what you envision for a quarterback. So to that end, I don't really have a good traditional ranking for him, other than he's not one of the 2 or 3 that I would consider when discussing quarterback names that are worthy of being drafted early on in this class.
Okay. All right. So this is where I'm going to get all the smoke, and people are going to be like, lighting fires on my lawn. I have Cam Ward at 3. I do. Cam Ward, 22 years old. He'll be 23 at the start of the season. He's 6'2", 223 pounds. He's a 4.5-year starter, 2 at Incarnate Ward, 2 at Washington State, and 1 at Miami. His grading is 67, 66.9, 59.9. And then with 1 year at Washington State, 80.2, and then 1 year at Miami, 92.5. In the last 2 years, he has 52 big-time throws and 38 turnover-worthy plays. That is a lot of turnover-worthy plays. 9.8 ADOT, 16.4 pressure to sack rate, and 2.93 second time to throw. So there are some good things, some bad things in those numbers that we can dig into a little bit more. I think it's a good thing that his time to throw is under 3 seconds, considering the type of mobile quarterback he is. The 52 big time throws is fantastic, but like I said, the 38 turnover worthy plays is a huge red flag for me. His 92.5 grade this year is really the only year where he's had elite grading. The 80.2 the year before is good, but it's not, you're not drafting that guy in the first round, right? You're not going to do that. Positives to me, right? Easy strength in his arm, great throwing motion. I think his running ability is a little bit above average, but I don't think it's fantastic. I heard people talking about it like it was like he's the second coming. I don't think he's got a great running ability. I think it's just good. And it's good for his frame, right? Because he is a thicker guy. Again, he's 223 pounds, so he can run you over. He has a little bit of that to him. That 93.9 grade, 93.9 grade, 26 big time throws, 4 turnover worthy plays on throws 20 plus yards down the field. So again, this is another quarterback that throws really, really well down the field. The weird part about it for him is it's all one side. It's to the middle and the left of the field. When you go to the right side of the field on deep throws, his grade drops to a 46.6. So is he just kind of one track mind type of quarterback? I don't know. The negatives for me, his footwork for a 5-year starter baffled me with how lazy and sloppy it was. This is a guy that will sit flat-footed in the pocket and doesn't use his legs at times. You could call it just confidence. You could call it swag. You call it whatever you want. I watched 2 full games of him plus a highlight tape, and to me, it came off as lazy, right? Like it was happening way too often for me to be saying that that's acceptable for a 5-year starter. I didn't think he had good touch on the ball, right? Some of the deep throws he can place, but in terms of, again, just completing play after play passes, right? The stuff that, pays your bills, the bread and butter, he is not putting good touch on those passes. I think he's a good decision maker, but the placement is bad, right? So if you make the good decision, but you don't throw the ball well to the point of contact, that's not great, right? Like that's a net negative to me. Some throws, I really had no idea where they were going. He's sailing them on people. Similar to kind of Shedeur at times. This is something I kind of wanted to see what you thought of. So we'll talk about Shedeur in a minute, but they both do this, where when they drop back, they drop back with their upper body square to the line of scrimmage and square to the defense. It's something Lamar Jackson does. And Lamar Jackson can do that because nobody can touch Lamar Jackson. But when you're Shedeur or you're Cam Ward, I don't think it's as easy to do that and get away with it, right? Like to be square to the defense. I saw that inviting defenders to get to him when maybe you would have been able to step up in a pocket and slip out of it. But when you're square to the defense, you're basically creating more space for them to get to. So I really didn't like that about their game. He's also very rarely seen under center, which is common for college. But, you know, if you're an NFL prospect, you're going to be having to go under center at some times. Some of his big throws, honestly, most of his big throws were to very open receivers. I didn't see a lot of like you're placing it in a contested catch situation and you put the ball in the perfect spot. It's just a lot of open receivers and he's hitting them, right? And he's making good throws to them. I wanted to see him play with more urgency. That's my final note. The lack of urgency, the lack of care that I saw in his game gave me a lot of concern. And one of the things that I've heard as a positive is his leadership. I can't speak to that, obviously, right? I haven't, not in those locker rooms. I'm not on that team, so I can't speak to that. But when you see him on the field, if that was my teammate, that would give me some pause, right? So that's what I have. I think my outcome is like traditionally, this is a third round pick, like an early third, but a third round pick. I'm talking about guys like Malik Willis and Drew Lock, guys that can make all the big time throws that you want to see, can throw it anywhere on the field, but just turn the ball over way too much for an NFL ready quarterback. The issue again is this is a guy that's played for 5 years in college. He shouldn't be doing that. So I think, you know, I'm not sure if that upside is still there to unlock with him.
So Cam Ward is pretty much the Miami Hurricanes. Like you hear Miami Hurricanes football and you're like, oh, it's the Miami Hurricanes. They have like 1 10-win season in like 20 something years. That's number one. Let's just get that out there. Okay. You start looking like it looks pretty. It's glamorous. They have a 30 for 30. They haven't actually produced very well in like this century. Okay. So like the last generation, they have not actually done well, but they look pretty. They're on TV a lot. Your first impression of them is generally pretty positive, and you remember the highlights. But then you look under the hood, and it's like a car with a really nice paint job, brand new tires, shiny rims, nice tinted windows, but the engine is crap. And I'm not saying Cam Ward's engine is crap. That's a little bit extreme, but the trends can be concerning. He has a higher turnover-worthy play percentage than any of the quarterbacks being discussed. Milroe, Shedeur, Jackson Dart, all the names. You name the quarterback in this class, he's got a higher turnover-worthy play percentage than them. And the competition was not very stiff that he was facing. I noticed I noted that he struggled driving the ball downfield to the field side. Wonder if part of that was to the right side or not. I didn't nail that specifically. I was just more looking at the geometry of the field in general, but that could be a part of it. And part of the drop back where he's staying square to the line of scrimmage. Maybe it's to see the defense better, but then maybe he has trouble actually driving and driving the ball downfield to the right side as opposed to his left where he's already sort of opened up there and can drive his hips more on the ball. That could be the case. Perhaps that's part of it. But to me, for such an experienced player to still have the turnover-worthy plays that he does is a problem for me. I want it to look super easy. Like when I watch Dillon Gabriel play quarterback, I see the limitations. They stand out clear as day. I mean, I'm looking at a 5'9", I don't care what he's listed at quarterback, dropping back, and he clearly doesn't have the same pop, the same whip on his throws that any of these other quarterback names do. But I'm like, this is a good quarterback. He knows where to go. He plays in timing, in rhythm. His placement is on point. He makes good decisions. All of that with Cam Ward is like, you know, waves in the sea. It can be up, it could be down. You know, sometimes it's fun. Sometimes it knocks you over. You're not quite sure what exactly you're going to get. When he's on, it's fun. And is it possible in the right situation in the NFL, you could really hone in on those positives? I think that's very possible. And it's not the most surprising thing to happen if that is the case, because The tools are there. The mobility is there. I think he's a bit of a gamer, which I like, as long as you channel that properly and you can sort of grow in a positive environment in the NFL with those tools. But right now, it's not someone I would look at typically and go, yeah, let's just, and to spend a first round pick on that is that would be, if he works out, that's bad process, good result. If that happens, if you take Cam Ward first or second overall and it ends up working out, it's kind of bad process, good result, because the tape, the trends are not there to warrant drafting someone that highly. It would be more so like some of these other quarterbacks that get taken in round 2 or 3 that eventually get a shot to start, and they either have it or they don't, whether that's a Willis, a Levis, go all the way back to Derek Carr, different style, but I'm just naming guys like, a Hurts drafted in the second round because they had alarming or concerning trends in their game that made you not want to select them in the first, but they had something there and you kind of fostered that over a couple of years and see what happens. That's where I think Cam Ward should normally fall into. But given the state of many teams atop this draft and just the draft class in general, he's being moved up to a tier or a plane that he really shouldn't be. But it doesn't mean it's all terribly hopeless, because I think the possibility is there, but it's not a winning hand to bet on, especially that highly in the draft.
So it's interesting because I don't know how to approach this with, is this going to be the Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis draft where we're like, somebody's going to go top 10, somebody's going to go top 5, and then nobody does? Or is it going to be like last year where you're like, JJ McCarthy's a borderline first round, second round pick, but he goes top 10 or 11, right? Like, I don't know what's going to happen. And that's why it was like really hard to judge Cam Ward, because I'm like, there's nobody else. So is he going to end up being, a top 5 pick when I have a third round grade on him? Like, that's tough. But is he your QB1?
No, he's still my QB2. Okay.
He's your QB2. He's my QB3. You talked about my QB2. Dillon Gabriel right now is my QB2. And we didn't talk about this before. People, this is fresh. Like,
I have no idea what Chris is going to say next.
He has no idea, right? Dillon Gabriel was my QB2, 24 years old, 6 feet tall listed. Like you said, he's probably 5'9". He's 200 pounds. He's probably like a buck 80. He's a 5-year starter, though. 5-year starter. He played 2 years at UCF. He played 2 years at Oklahoma, and this last year at Oregon. 81.4 grade, 90.9 grade, 87 grade, 91.9 grade, and 87 grade. That's much closer to what you expect from a guy in the conversation as the top quarterback. I'm not saying that's the case for Dillon Gabriel. I have him as 2, but I don't necessarily expect him to be number 2 in most people's draft boards. He has 36 big-time throws the past 2 years, 21 turnover-worthy plays. So that's still like not a great ratio there. His 7.0 ADOT is rather low. His pressure to sack rate, though, is incredible, 13.9. And his 2.78 time to throw is the best of the guys we're talking about today. I talked about the last guy first. You mentioned Dillon Gabriel, but give me your overall synopsis.
Yeah, he's just smart. He does everything that he's supposed to do. It's like if you created a player in college football 25 and the arm strength was like 58, but the awareness and decision-making and everything else was like 99. It's pretty much what he is, because a lot of his turnover-worthy plays that I found were more so because of his limitations. He sees it. He sees what the defense is trying to do, and he just can't get the ball there. Yeah, he gets confused, here or there a couple of times. He's got on defense. But in general, he is just in control. He's what you expect when you see a 24-year-old quarterback in college. Okay, why are you still a college quarterback at 24 years old? Probably limited physically. Okay, well, if you're limited physically, but you're still a starter at a big-time school, you're probably very good at football. And that's what he is. He's just in command. He's very calm. That Oregon offense helps a bit too, because a lot of it is quick decisions. And once you have a grasp of that, it almost makes things easy for you. But he's mastered it. He plays quarterback at a 400 level while getting the ball out very quickly. It's just when you take away the first or second option for him, does he have the physical ability to make something happen thereafter? And that's where his problems lie, is that he's just so physically limited. It's like I'm watching a better Kellen Moore in college. It's where, like, I really want to like you, but but your fastball is like 85 miles an hour. Like what can I do with this in the big leagues? There's not much I can do unless you can throw a knuckleball, and he's not necessarily a 4-4 guy who can, turn into a Lamar Jackson or whatever the hell some imaginative mind thinks of for Jalen Milroe. That's not Dillon Gabriel's game. He's not a physical specimen. So I love his command. I wish you could take that and put it on to Jalen Milroe, the frame and the arm and the legs of Jalen Milroe, because I think you really have something there. But I see physical limitations and otherwise a quick decision maker, someone who can extend plays a little bit and make things happen, but by and large is not going to threaten defenses downfield. And when they do that and they can really start to suffocate the box and that 10 yards within the line of scrimmage area there, you're not going to win a lot of football games at the next level. And that's what's holding it back overall. But very good college football player, probably going to be a good trivia answer to a lot of questions 10, 15 years from now in a lot of bars. But I don't see the starter upside long-term for him as a player in the pros.
Okay.
Or starter in the pros, I should say. He could definitely come in and run an offense as a backup if someone gets hurt and you need him for a month.
Yeah, and that's essentially what I had on him too. I do think, like, similar to the conversation we had about Mason Graham, obviously Mason Graham is a way different conversation, but just because somebody doesn't have the elite traits that you're used to seeing doesn't make the elite trait of being such a fundamentally sound football player with great decision-making abilities. Like, that's also an elite trait sometimes, right? So I think that can't go unnoticed for Dillon Gabriel because he really is fundamentally such a sound football player, quick decision maker, smart decision maker. He doesn't seem to panic much, right? He's got great pocket movement with his feet, kind of reminding me a little bit of, obviously Kyler in the pocket, like the way he moves around the pocket with his size. He's got nice touch, right? He doesn't, he makes like easy, he makes all the throws look easy. He's got, decent arm talent, just maybe not the strength you want, right? Like you've mentioned, he doesn't have the arm strength that you want. But he can throw NFL open, which I think is a differentiator between him and some of the other quarterbacks in this class. Is like a lot of them are throwing college open, not NFL open. And that's a huge difference at the next level. I think he's doing that better than anybody else in this class. Obviously, his frame is not NFL frame. Can he play in a true NFL offense at that size? I don't know. He probably at 24 years old doesn't have a lot of growth left in him in terms of his ability to just develop into a different quarterback, right? A next level quarterback. It's probably not there. So to me, this is also a 3rd round pick, but you're getting a really good backup quarterback. Like teams that want that great backup quarterback, I think this is a guy that can do that for you. And I hope he gets a chance. I could see him going and backing up a Kyler Murray, a Bryce Young, or a team in those divisions, getting this guy to be the practice squad quarterback, right? Because if you're facing those guys twice a year, there is a value in facing a guy that can replicate that game. I like Dillon Gabriel a lot more than I thought I would. I have him at 2. It sounds like you have him maybe at 3 or a little further down. Who do you have at 1?
It's Shedeur for me still. And I still question whether Shedeur is someone I would draft, but he's my number 1 quarterback. And I'll start with the negatives about Shedeur Sanders. The biggest one is that he holds onto the ball forever. He is like Justin Fields back there, but is not a physical beast like Justin Fields. It's really bad how long he holds onto the ball and creates his own pressure so unnecessarily. That's number 1. Number 2, his work in the pocket, which kind of goes hand in hand with this, is he's a drifter in the pocket. That's terrible. All you're doing is creating bad angles for your tackles and pass protection and giving guys on the edge a better angle of pursuit to get you for the sack. So again, goes back to creating his own pressure and his own sacks. 3 is he has no or very limited variance when it comes to arm angles. In today's game, with a lot of the quick passes, wide receiver screens and such, you have to adjust. You have to have the ability to adjust your arm angle and be able to kind of whip the ball around. He doesn't have that. He has his throwing motion, and that's it. He throws it one way when he's in phase, and that's pretty much it. He is not able to. He doesn't have that flexibility, that nimbleness to adjust his arm angle as needed and still get the ball where he needs it when he needs it. He just doesn't have that trait. On the flip side, when the ball is gone from his hand, the placement of it is typically exactly where you want it to be. He's phenomenal at placing the ball where it needs to be. His big time throw rate, I didn't write down the ranking, but I'll start with his turnover worthy play rate. It's literally second to last in the Power 5 among quarterbacks with I think 300 dropbacks this past season, only behind like Brady Cook, which whatever, it's a Missouri offense. But he doesn't turn the ball over when it's in the air because his placement is so good. He keeps it out of harm's way. It's always over the correct shoulder, in stride, what have you. He allows his receivers to make plays on the back end because of his ball placement. It's phenomenal. And that's the one thing that I look at and say, okay, can he, I'm not going to ask the question that when you ask me this, my answer is no, it's innate when it comes to, can he develop sort of the pocket presence and such? And to me, a lot of that is innate, and that's what's scary. But if he can shore up his bad habits in the pocket, or just really stand in there and make quicker decisions, then there's something that is there. Because that's the fatal flaw with Shedeur Sanders. He holds onto the ball too long, and when he holds onto the ball too long, he drifts and creates pressure, and that's bad news. If you can get the ball out of his hands quickly, then it's poetry in motion once it's in the air. I think he would have done great in an Oregon offense for that very reason. He's played in a pro-style offense. He's under Pat Shurmur there in Colorado. So a part of me wonders what big changes in development can he realistically have in the NFL, given he's got a bit of an NFL background already and some of those bad habits are still there. But the quality of play, of ball placement, is such that that's the one name that I really look at in this class and say, okay, that's worth taking a shot on. There's way more to the analysis and to the evaluation than this when it comes to, especially at quarterback, the mental side of things. Dudes arguing with ball boys. Colorado has its own circus. And a lot of times I dismiss a lot of that or don't get caught up in too much of that. But it is something when you're trying to draft a quarterback in the top 2 or 3 of the NFL draft that is probably worth looking into, and you don't know how that's going to shake out. So pretty much everything until the ball is in the air, I struggle with Shedeur Sanders, but when the ball is in the air, he's as good as some of the names mentioned in previous drafts that we didn't have concerns about being drafted in the top 5, 6, 8 in a given year. That's why I have him number 1.
Okay. I also have him at number 1. For a lot of the reasons you said. There's a lot to dig into here, but first, I'm going to give the high level stuff. 22 years old. He's going to be 23 on draft day. He's 6'2", 215 pounds. So he's on the smaller side of an NFL quarterback, but he's by no means small. 4-year starter, 2 at Jackson State, 2 at Colorado, 79.5 grade, 83.7 at Jackson State, and then 88.4 and 91.1 at Colorado. Again, those are more like, the top of the first round numbers that you expect. 51 big time throws the last 2 years, which is great. And only 16 turnover worthy plays. Also great. I think that's a big differentiator between him and Cam Ward, is the ability to not turn the ball over. His ADOT is low. It's an 8.1. Pressure to sack rate, extremely high, 20.9. And his time to throw is 3 this year, 3 seconds to throw the ball on average. That is up from 2.89 last year. So I think he has the ability to get the ball out quicker. He did not show that this year, but it is something that he can do. I think the big differentiator you touched on between Shedeur and everybody else is that advanced QB knowledge that I think he has that is kind of rare when you're talking about a college quarterback. He, again, offensive coordinator is Pat Shurmur. That is NFL head coach being your OC. That's fantastic. I also know that throughout this guy's upbringing, he had some of the most special QB coaches that you could ask for. I'm pretty sure he has Tom Brady's number, and the two of them talked pretty regularly. He's getting advice from the top of the top, the creme of the creme. And I think he applies that in his game. You see aspects of really good fundamentals in his drop back. I know there's some drifting. I know there's some stuff he does that you don't love. And I get that. And I see that too. But I also see the good stuff, right? So I think that there is the ability to become even more fundamentally sound within the pocket. He has decent escapability, but it's not great. It's funny because it reminded me a lot of Aaron Rodgers, the way that he ran with the football when he did decide to escape, right? He's not this like excellent runner of the football, but he has it in him where at times he can use it to be kind of like just a special quality, another threat that, his skill set, the speed that he has wouldn't really tell you that it's there, but it is there. I think he does have above average field vision, and he has the ability to go through reads, which I don't know if any of the other quarterbacks besides Dillon Gabriel have in this class. Adequate arm strength, but I do think that that's my biggest concern about his game is his arm strength. He makes the easy throws look easy, which is what you want, right? I talked about that being my biggest problem with Cam Ward. I think Shedeur makes that stuff look really easy. He throws a very catchable ball with good rotation, good spin on it. He has adequate legs. I talked about that. He actually does better without play action when you look at his numbers, which is pretty interesting. And balls 20 plus yards down the field, 95.1 grade, 25 big time throws, 0 turnover worthy plays. This guy can throw the ball down the field, even though he doesn't have the arm strength that I would want for that kind of a thrower. The negatives. I was trying to diagnose a lot of the issues that you mentioned about his pocket presence and the way he moves in the pocket. And I talked about it with Cam Ward, that Shedeur does it the same way, where when they drop back, a lot of times they're backpedaling backwards with their body square to the defense. I think that's a way for QBs to kind of cheat so that they could see more of the field quickly instead of their body being turned and maybe they have to pivot their head. I think that's why they do it. But I think it also invites a lot of pressure and makes extending plays that much harder when you're square to the defense. So I think that's something that, while it works for Lamar Jackson because he's the quickest guy in the NFL and Aaron Rodgers is the most intelligent guy in the NFL potentially, I don't think that that's something that Shedeur or Cam Ward are going to get away with consistently. I don't like that he has to rotate his frame to create torque when he's throwing the ball down the field. That concerns me. It does not look easy for him to throw the ball down the field. Is it easy for the receivers to catch? Does he put perfect placement on the ball? Yes, but it takes power and momentum for him to create those throws. He has a bit of a windup as well. That was my biggest knock on DTR, is that windup will tell people that you're throwing the ball, and it gives DBs that much more of a chance to make a play on it. Obviously, he didn't turn over the ball a lot, but at the next level, it's that much harder. I also noticed he kind of taps the ball sometimes before he creates that windup. He's tapping. And that's it's almost like it's a tell, right? If you're playing poker, that would be my tell that Shedeur is getting ready to throw the ball, and I would start breaking as a corner. And yes, he has the ability to go through his progression, but he doesn't always make perfect decisions when he goes through the progression. Like, he sometimes will go through it and then throw a kill ball right to his receiver, who's going to end up getting smacked. So it's perfect placement, but the receiver is going to get decked because he's throwing that ball. Sometimes
he's just trying to get 15 yards. He's trying to get 15 extra yards. That's all that is.
Yeah. And in today's college and NFL, you kind of get away with doing that sometimes, which is a shame. I think he creates negative plays as well instead of just getting rid of the ball at times. I think that's what makes Aaron Rodgers so special, is that Aaron Rodgers will get rid of the ball instead of throwing a turnover-worthy play. Again, at the next level, I think the players that Shedeur will be going against will create some plays on the ball that didn't exist in college. I think sometimes, or I know sometimes, he throws off of a back pedal, which, again, because he's doing that Lamar style drop back where he's square, sometimes he's throwing while he's doing that. And again, while you can get away with that in college, and yes, it works for some drop offs, it's not going to work as easily in the NFL. So those are kind of my major concerns. I think, again, in a traditional draft, I would say this is a really good day 2 prospect with a lot of upside. I was thinking about last year's draft, and I was saying to myself, where would I have had him? And I talked about JJ McCarthy and Bo Nix in my head. That's how I was going back and forth in my head about those two guys being he's somewhere in there. Bo Nix, I liked everything he did on film, but that Oregon offense made it so easy for him. We weren't sure that it would translate. He was also super old. So we're is there more left? Bo Nix is looking great. JJ McCarthy had a lot of the intangibles. You saw it all on film, the athletic ability. He had the arm power, but he wasn't really making his own decisions either. So there was some unknown there. So in my head, it's somewhere between those two guys. And I had both of those guys as day 2 prospects last year. I think Shedeur would fall in between those guys in a normal draft. In this draft, I think he's the guy that again, like you said, you take a risk on in the first round. I think you would do that with him. And I see it, like I see bits of Rodgers. I see bits of Burrow, right? Burrow doesn't have the strongest arm either. I see bits of Lamar in his pocket movement, and I see Tua's arm strength, which is, again, that's my biggest concern is, you could give Tua Tyreek Hill and you could give him Jalen Waddle, but if he doesn't have the arm strength to get the ball down the field to them, it's kind of meaningless. But I still think he's the guy. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, they're good thoughts. I'll add, I think, to have faith that some of the issues that need to be cleaned up can get cleaned up, probably has to go somewhere with a good offensive line, because you probably can't fix some of those issues as far as time to throw and creating pressure overnight. So if he goes to the Giants, I'm going to need a lot more up front than what they've shown in the last decade.
Yeah, but the one thing I will say about the Giants situation in general, like you have to remember that Daniel Jones didn't throw for more than like 22 touchdowns in college. And he got to the NFL and I don't think he threw more than like 15, right? Maybe one year he threw for more than 15 touchdowns, but like this is not a guy that could create offense. And I think Shedeur and Cam Ward have proved that they can do that. So I think either of those guys, if the Giants take them, it is a step up from what they have. Does that mean it's like a long-term answer and it's going to save your franchise? No, I'm not saying that either, but it's something to think about. But I do need to run. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't yet, please give us a follow on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and X at all22_PFF, and give us a review wherever you watch or listen to your podcast. Have a great rest of your day.
Go.